She was knocking on the door, soft at first, then harder, her voice trembling as she called out for help, each plea more desperate than the last. Inside that cold, tiled bathroom, my daughter sat alone, frightened, confused, and forgotten. She had studied all week for that exam. She had packed her bag the night before, memorized every formula, every line. But when the bell rang that morning, signaling the start of the test, she had worked so hard for she wasn't there. Because someone with authority told the school to lock her in, and they did. The staff claimed they followed instructions. They said it was to keep things in order. But the truth? The truth is that my daughter was deliberately shut away because she was disabled, because she made them uncomfortable. While her classmates filled in answer sheets, she was behind a closed door, tapping on it with shaking hands, unsure why no one came. By the time they unlocked it, the classroom was empty. The test was over, and her chance, her dignity, was gone. You might think this is a mistake, a miscommunication. But what if I told you it wasn't? What if I told you this was planned, approved, and quietly swept under the rug by someone who hides behind HOA titles and fake smiles? This is not just a story about a bathroom. This is a story about power, discrimination, and the day I found out how far one woman would go to erase my daughter's place in the world. Before everything went wrong, before the locked bathroom door, the missed exam, and the endless meetings, I used to think we lived in a peaceful little world. Not perfect, no, but safe. We had a modest two-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by maple trees and morning birdsong. Our street was the kind of place where kids rode scooters until sunset, sprinklers danced on well-manicured lawns, and neighbors waved while taking out the trash. It felt stable, familiar, like home. My daughter, Ava, was the light of that world. Ava was born with a mild form of cerebral palsy. It affected her mobility a bit. She walked with braces and sometimes needed her wheelchair for longer distances, but not her spirit, not her mind. She was sharp, curious, and heartbreakingly empathetic, always asking questions, always reading beyond her grade level, always looking out for anyone who seemed left out. And she loved school. For Ava, school wasn't just a place to learn. It was her stage, her escape, her kingdom of possibilities. She adored her teachers, worshipped the library, and even liked tests. To her, they were challenges to be conquered. Every morning, she'd wake up early, lay out her books just so, and practice her speech for the school announcements. She had this tiny voice, but it carried more confidence than most adults I know. I still remember her beaming the day she was chosen to lead her class in the national anthem. She practiced in front of the mirror for days, even asked if I thought she could be a teacher someday. We had our routines, our quiet joys. On weekends, we'd visit the community center down the road, watch movies, grab hot dogs, let Ava race down the ramp into the playground with wind in her hair. The neighbors mostly kept to themselves, but they were polite. Some waved, others asked about Ava occasionally. There was no tension, no drama. Just the steady, sleepy rhythm of suburban life. I trusted her school, too. It was small, but well-funded and attentive. Her special education coordinator was responsive. Her homeroom teacher once told me Ava was the brightest star in class. We had individualized education plan, IEP, meetings twice a year. Adjustments were made. Accommodations were honored. For the most part, they cared. I really believe that. And then there was Karen. She moved into the neighborhood about a year and a half ago. A tall, sharp-featured woman with perfect hair and a clipboard always tucked under her arm. At first, she seemed harmless, a little intense, maybe, but always smiling. She introduced herself as the new vice chair of the HOA and handed out printed pamphlets on community standards during her first week. I didn't think much of it. Every community has that one person who takes the rules too seriously. Karen had a habit of watching from her front porch. She'd make comments about landscaping, porch lights being left on, trash bins not being brought in on time. But when it came to Ava, her tone was different. Quieter, but colder. One day, after Ava played outside for a little too long, Karen approached me and said, Not everyone's comfortable with, loud children around, especially the ones that draw too much attention. I laughed it off, thinking she was just awkward with words. But the comments kept coming. Subtle at first. Shouldn't she use the back ramp instead of the front stairs? Or the wheelchair kind of blocks the sidewalk, doesn't it? And eventually, some people are saying your daughter causes a bit of a distraction at school. Some people. She never said who, never said why. But I noticed a change in her presence, less of a neighbor, more of a monitor. She started attending school board meetings, getting more involved in the PDA, always with that same professional smile. And I still didn't see it. Not clearly. Because when life feels normal, you don't expect it to collapse. Because when your child is happy, you believe the world is fair. Because when you've worked so hard to create stability for someone who already faces so many challenges, you want to believe that people will meet you with compassion. I was wrong, and I didn't know it yet, but the same woman who handed me a welcome packet was quietly working behind the scenes to erase my daughter's place in our neighborhood and eventually in her own school. But that truth hadn't reached me yet. Not until the day Ava came home, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "They locked me in and no one came." At first, it was small, harmless, even things that could be brushed off as misunderstandings or bad communication. Like the time Karen sent an email to all the residents complaining that certain households are leaving toys and medical equipment on their front lawns, with a passive-aggressive reminder that all community-facing areas should remain clear and aesthetic. That was Ava's walker. She had left it on our front porch after therapy one afternoon because she was exhausted. I replied politely in the group thread, explaining it was necessary medical equipment and that it was temporary. Karen didn't respond. She just removed me from the mailing list. A few days later, we got our first official notice from the HOA, violation number 134, ramp installation not approved by HOA board. I stared at the letter, confused. The ramp? The one we had installed with full city permits months before Karen even moved in? It was the very ramp Ava used to get in and out of the house. I called the HOA office to clarify. The assistant on the phone hesitated, then said, "Technically, she's right, it was never submitted to the HOA. But usually we don't enforce that on accessibility modifications." That was Karen's style. Never overt, never loud, just quiet enough to seem legitimate, just subtle enough that questioning her made you look overly sensitive or difficult. But it wasn't subtle to us. It was everywhere. From the anonymous complaints about unusual noise during Ava's physical therapy sessions to the sudden refusal of our driveway extension request, despite 3 neighbors having longer driveways than ours. Karen had begun her quiet campaign. The worst part? She smiled the whole time. Whenever we crossed paths on the street, she'd wave like nothing was wrong. "Hi there," she'd chirp. "How's your little one doing?" Her voice always had this artificial sweetness, like syrup hiding a bitter pill. One time, she even leaned in close and said, "I'm sure it's exhausting, all that you do, but have you ever considered a different school? One that's better suited for her needs?" I stared at her, stunned. My mouth opened, but no words came out. It wasn't just rude. It was strategic. It was the first time I realized that Karen didn't just dislike my daughter, she wanted her gone. Soon after, strange things started happening. Our mailbox was found open repeatedly. Trash from someone else's bin ended up on our lawn, and then we got written up for it. HOA letters came in thick and fast, citing everything from improper grass length to unsightly decor. One was about Ava's bird feeder. It was drawing squirrels, Karen said. A health hazard. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I kept telling myself, she's just that kind of person. She's uptight. She wants control. Don't escalate. But ignoring her didn't stop it, it fed it. Then came the park incident. Ava loved the park. It was her favorite place in the world, a tiny wood-chipped area with a slide, 2 swings, and a sensory path the PDA had fundraised for. On sunny afternoons, we'd go there with her favorite book and snacks. She'd roll up to the swings, ask me to help her on, and shout higher until we were both laughing. But one Saturday, as we were packing up to leave, Karen approached the swings. She wasn't alone. She had a clipboard and another HOA board member with her. She didn't greet us. She just walked up, leaned in close to Ava, and said, "These swings weren't rated for wheelchair users. If you fall, it's a liability for the neighborhood." I stepped in immediately, furious. "She's not in the wheelchair when she swings," I snapped. "She uses it to get here." Karen looked unfazed. "I'm just concerned for her safety and the community's. You understand." The following week, the swings were roped off with caution tape. A sign read, "Temporarily closed for safety review." They remained closed for nearly 2 months. Then she took her obsession to the school. At first, it was just rumors. A friend who worked as a volunteer told me Karen had joined the school's community oversight committee, a fancy name for a group of neighborhood parents who supposedly acted as liaisons between the HOA and the school board. I asked how that made sense. Schools aren't governed by HOAs. But Karen found her loophole. She was on the PDA now. She was organizing fundraisers, attending policy reviews, and, according to my friend, talking to staff about standards of conduct and student safety. I should have pulled Ava out right then. But again, I wanted to believe it wouldn't escalate, that there were lines no adult would cross. I was wrong. Within weeks, Ava was being pulled out of certain group activities. Her assistant told me it was to avoid overexertion, though Ava insisted she was fine. A staff member quietly admitted there had been a few complaints. Nothing serious, just some concerns from parents about her taking too much of the teacher's time. You know how politics are. Karen was poisoning the air. She wasn't just making my daughter feel different, she was isolating her, and she was doing it with a smile, a clipboard, and just enough plausible deniability to get away with it. At school meetings, she sat at the front, nodding graciously. At HOA events, she brought cookies. But behind the scenes, she was filing reports, writing letters, whispering poison into the ears of decision makers. And no one, not the teachers, not the neighbors, not even the other parents, wanted to call it out. Because it wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was subtle, professional, politely masked discrimination. And that made it even more dangerous. Then came the email. I found it by accident when Ava's IEP coordinator forwarded me a copy of the updated support plan. Attached was a thread between Karen and the school's vice principal. The subject line? Behavioral impact concerns. Karen had written, "While I support inclusive education, I worry about the growing disruptions caused by Ava's unique needs. Perhaps a quieter space for her during testing and high-focus activities could benefit everyone." I sat at my desk, fists clenched. A quieter space. That was code. Code for separation. Code for removal. Karen had crossed the line, and she wasn't hiding it anymore. She wanted my daughter out of the classroom, out of the park, out of the neighborhood, and if no one else would stop her, I would. The first time I realized Karen had truly wormed her way into the school system was when Ava came home confused and unusually quiet. Not sad, just disconnected. I asked her how her day went, and she gave me a shrug. I asked again, and she finally said, "I didn't sit with the class today. I was in the library all afternoon." That seemed odd. Ava loved class time. She thrived in group settings, especially during art and science. So, why had she been pulled out? When I emailed her teacher for clarification, I got a polite reply: "We're experimenting with alternative learning spaces to help some students avoid sensory overload." Ava seemed to enjoy the calmness. We thought it might be beneficial for her focus. I reread the message 3 times. It sounded thoughtful on the surface, but no one had discussed this with me. There'd been no update to her IEP, no consultation, no warning. It was subtle, clever, but something in my gut told me this wasn't about Ava's needs. It was about someone else's discomfort. A week later, I noticed Ava wasn't bringing home her usual homework folder. Her speech therapy notes had stopped coming. She mentioned missing her turn at morning announcements. Slowly, quietly, she was being removed. Not expelled, not punished, just shifted, like a piece of furniture someone was trying to tuck into a corner. And every time I asked the school about it, they gave me vague, friendly responses. dressed in educational jargon, just helping her regulate, trying new strategies, nothing permanent. But I knew what it was. It was Karen. By now, Karen was a familiar face at the school. PDA president, event coordinator, guest speaker, volunteer reader. She baked cookies for fundraisers, handed out pamphlets about student wellness, and casually dropped her HOA credentials at every turn. I represent the community, she'd say, and I think it's important our school aligns with neighborhood values. Behind that thin veil of community concern, she was campaigning. I later found out Karen had been speaking privately with several teachers and administrators, presenting herself as a concerned advocate. She's not attacking anyone, one parent later told me. She just says things like, I worry the environment isn't fair to the rest of the students, or maybe Ava would thrive better with one-on-one time away from distractions. It sounded supportive, unless you knew what she really meant. What she meant was, your child doesn't belong here. Still, I had no proof of any malicious intent, just whispers and changes, until a document landed in my inbox. It was a mistake. A school administrator new to the district and unaware of the politics CC'd me on a reply to an internal discussion about accommodations planning. The thread had started with Karen. She had written, with the upcoming standardized exams, I propose we create a separate environment for students with higher support needs. It's not punitive, it's proactive. Distractions are a real concern. I know parents who won't let their kids test if these disruptions continue. Let's prioritize everyone's success. And under that, a vice principal had responded, noted, perhaps the library again? Or even the staff restroom wing? Quiet, low traffic. Karen, thanks for thinking ahead. I remember staring at those words, my hand frozen over the mouse. The staff restroom wing? That wasn't a testing room. That wasn't even a space used for instruction. That was an isolated hallway with a single locked door and zero supervision. My heart raced. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? Surely they didn't mean to put my daughter there during the most important test of the year? But the tone of the emails told me otherwise. They weren't asking questions. They were planning. I called the school immediately. I demanded answers. The admin assistant stammered, said the principal was in a meeting and promised to follow up. That call never came. The next day, I went in person. I sat across from the principal, clutching the printed email thread like a weapon. Why was I not informed about any of this? I asked. She shifted uncomfortably. There's no finalized plan yet. We're just exploring options. Options that include locking my daughter in a hallway bathroom wing. I asked, my voice rising. That's your idea of an accommodation? She raised her hands. Let's not get emotional. I'm not emotional. I'm furious. She softened her tone. Karen only suggested, Karen doesn't make decisions for my daughter. I cut in. She's not a staff member. She's not a therapist. She's not even qualified in education. She's a community voice, the principal said, and several other parents have raised concerns about Ava's movements, about her chair, about her presence. Her presence. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just Karen. She had turned others, other parents, staff members, people who once smiled at Ava, now saw her as inconvenient. I left that meeting with shaking hands and a burning heart. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring out the windshield, watching kids walk into school. And I wondered how many of them had parents who feared a little girl like mine, a girl who'd never hurt anyone, a girl who just wanted to take her test. That night, Ava asked me, am I a problem at school? I felt my throat close. Why would you think that? I asked, kneeling beside her, because Mrs. Lang said I might not take the test with the others, that I'm going to a different room. She said it's special, but I don't want to be special. I want to be there. I hugged her tight. You're not a problem, baby. They are. But the clock was ticking. Exam day was 5 days away, and no one from the school would give me a straight answer about Ava's testing location. I emailed. I called. I even contacted the district office. Everyone claimed the same thing. We're still finalizing details. Finalizing what? A hallway? A closet? A locked door? The day before the exam, I sent one final message, to whom it may concern. If my daughter is not seated with her class, with the same accommodations she's always been granted per her IEP, I will escalate this immediately. You will not remove her, isolate her, or lock her away in the name of convenience. This isn't about disruption. This is about discrimination. Don't make me prove that publicly. Ava's mother no reply came. And then came exam morning. Ava wore her favorite shirt, light blue, with tiny stars. She packed 2 sharpened pencils and her fidget ring. She was nervous but excited. "I'm ready," she whispered as I helped her into her chair. I walked her to the entrance, kissed her forehead, watched her roll into the school, unaware of what was waiting. I went home, tried to work, couldn't concentrate. I paced. I checked my email. Nothing. And then, 2 hours later, I got the call. It was Ava. She was sobbing. "Mom," she cried, "they locked me in. I knocked and knocked, but no one came. I missed everything. I didn't get to take my test." My vision blurred. My hands clenched. My daughter had been deliberately locked away, not in a study room, not in a library, but in a staff bathroom wing, alone, while her classmates took the test she spent weeks preparing for. And I knew, with crystal clear certainty, that this wasn't a mistake. It was the unthinkable request granted, made real by cowardice, enabled by silence, and orchestrated by one woman who wore a smile like armor. Karen. She did this. And now it was war. The day started just like any other, ordinary, unassuming. The kind of morning where you're too busy rushing to realize that everything is about to fall apart. Ava was up early. She always woke early when she had something big ahead. She had her little routine down to perfection, brushing her teeth while humming her test day song, checking her lucky pencil pouch twice, then slipping her IEP folder into the side pocket of her backpack, just in case anyone forgot the accommodations again. That morning, she even put on lip gloss. "In case they take pictures of the winners," she joked. My heart swelled. She was so proud, so ready, so unaware. I dropped her off at the school entrance just before 7:45 a.m. I remember her turning around before she entered and waving with both hands. "Wish me luck, Mom." I smiled back. "You've got this, baby." And then she rolled through those double doors and disappeared into a system that was supposed to protect her. What happened next, I didn't know for hours. But Ava told me later. And when she did, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Shortly after arriving, her classroom assistant was told that Ava would be testing elsewhere, that someone from administration would escort her to her new location. Ava didn't question it. She trusted them. The woman who came to get her, someone Ava didn't know well, smiled and said, "We're trying something new today, sweetheart. A nice, quiet space just for you." She wheeled her down a hallway Ava had never been in before, past the janitor's closet, past the staff lounge, toward the staff bathrooms. That's where they stopped. The woman opened a door at the very end of the hallway. A single, tiled room. Not a restroom, not a lounge, just an empty utility space with a small table, a plastic chair, and flickering ceiling light. "We'll just have you wait here while we set things up," she said gently. "Someone will come get you in a minute." Ava hesitated. "Am I still taking the test with my class?" The woman smiled, tight, rehearsed. "Of course. Just wait here, honey." And then the door closed. Ava heard the click, and then silence. At first, she waited patiently. She pulled out her fidget ring, tapped her fingers on the table. But minutes ticked by. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, stagnant. There were no footsteps in the hall, no voices outside, no classroom sounds, just the low, electric buzz of a dying light overhead. She tried the handle. It didn't budge. Still calm, she knocked lightly. "Hello." No response. She waited longer. Knocked again. Then louder. "Hello? Is someone there?" Nothing. She started to panic. Outside that room, the bell rang. 8:30 a.m. The state exam had officially begun. Inside, Ava was locked in a room with no windows, no clock, and no help. She began banging on the door. "Please," she shouted. "Please let me out. I'm supposed to take my test." She told me later she screamed until her throat hurt, that she cried, that she thought maybe she'd done something wrong, maybe this was her fault, maybe she'd failed before she even began. But no one came. Not the teacher, not the assistant, not the principal, and certainly not Karen. Instead, in room 2B, Ava's teacher was calling her name during roll call. "She's not here," the proctor asked. The teacher frowned. "I thought she was being escorted." She never arrived. One of Ava's classmates later told me they just marked her absent, that no one even checked. Meanwhile, Ava was still knocking, still whispering, "I'm here, I'm trying," until she sat on the floor, curled in a ball, and waited. She waited for 2 hours. I didn't find out until I got a voicemail at 11:06 a.m. It was the front office secretary. "Hi, this is Miss Daniels from the main office. Could you please come pick up Ava? She's had, a bit of a rough morning. Nothing serious, just some confusion. Please come when you can." Some confusion? I drove there in less than 10 minutes. When I arrived, Ava was sitting in the nurse's office. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She didn't look up when I entered. I crouched beside her. "Baby, what happened?" She whispered, "They forgot me." "What?" "In the room." I kept knocking, but no one came. I missed the test. I looked up at the nurse, who immediately avoided eye contact. "I want to speak to the principal," I said, my voice cold. Within minutes, I was in her office. She sat behind her desk, clearly shaken, but trying to keep her composure. "There seems to have been a miscommunication," she began. "Miscommunication? You locked a disabled child in a room for 2 hours. I snapped. "We didn't lock her. She couldn't open the door." She flinched. "It was supposed to be temporary. A quiet space. We didn't anticipate the door, locking behind. Don't insult me." She paused, then sighed. "I understand this is upsetting." I laughed, hollow, angry. Upsetting doesn't even begin to cover it. I asked who had ordered this, who had made the decision to remove Ava from the classroom, to place her alone in an unsupervised room. The principal dodged, blamed the testing coordinator. The testing coordinator blamed the assistant principal. The assistant principal, when I cornered her in the hallway, finally said, "It was suggested by a community representative." I didn't need to ask who. Karen, the very woman who had spent months quietly removing Ava from everything she loved, had finally crossed the line. She hadn't just taken away a swing set or a classroom role, she had taken away Ava's dignity. She had turned a child's big day into a humiliating nightmare. And the school let her do it. They enabled it. They helped. I went home that day with Ava curled up in the back seat, still too tired to cry. And I made a promise to myself this would not be swept under the rug. This would not be another closed-door decision. Because my daughter wasn't a problem. She wasn't a burden. She was a child. And someone had locked her away like she didn't matter. But she did matter. And now the whole world was going to hear about it. The next morning, I walked into that school not as a parent, but as a woman with fire in her bones. I was calm on the outside, but inside I was volcanic. Something had been taken from my daughter, and no one was going to bury it under a pile of policy papers and polite excuses. I asked for a formal meeting with the principal. "Of course," she said, with that overly smooth tone people use when they're trying to manage damage. The vice principal joined, along with the school counselor and a district representative who just happened to be on campus that day. They sat across the table from me, blinking like deer in headlights. "I need answers," I said, steady. "Who approved Ava's removal from her class? Who decided she should be placed in that room, alone, with a locked door, on one of the most important days of her academic year?" There was a long silence. Then the principal spoke. It was a misunderstanding. There was no intention to isolate her. The room was meant to be a quiet space. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "that someone accidentally led a disabled child into a locked, unsupervised room for 2 hours and nobody checked on her until after testing ended?" "It wasn't locked. She couldn't open the door. That's locked to a child." The district rep chimed in, carefully neutral. "We're reviewing the incident internally. There will be accountability if any policies were breached. If I leaned in. Are you reviewing the cameras? Because I'd like to see the footage. I'd like to know who walked her in and who walked away. The principal flinched. Unfortunately, the cameras in that hallway weren't operational that morning. Of course they weren't. My stomach dropped, not with surprise, but with confirmation. This wasn't incompetence. This was a cover-up. I'd also like access to the communications between the staff and any community representatives involved in the decision. I added, another pause. The vice principal looked uneasy. Some of those emails may have been archived or deleted in accordance with retention policy. Convenient, I said, venom soft in my voice. Later that day, I began reaching out to school staff directly. Some wouldn't talk at all. Others gave me fragments, pieces. We were told Ava would have special accommodations, one teacher whispered. Karen said she had parental consent. She didn't, I replied. I know that now. I began collecting everything, emails I still had, Ava's IEP voicemail timestamps, even screenshots from parents who remembered Karen's push to create a quiet zone for students with unique challenges. A former school employee sent me an anonymous message. Karen started talking to staff months ago, said she had safety concerns and that some students were too disruptive to be in group testing environments. She played it like she cared, but it was always about exclusion. I requested a second meeting, this time with the school board. The response I got? A letter stating that no wrongdoing was found and that the school had acted in the best interest of all students. They used the phrase unfortunate lapse in protocol. No apology, no accountability. I forwarded the entire case to a civil rights advocacy group. I posted Ava's story on a private Facebook parent group, and within 24 hours my phone blew up. Mothers messaged me, horrified. Some had kids with autism, ADHD, physical disabilities. They'd all felt the shift, the isolating policies, the subtle removals. One parent wrote, my son started eating lunch alone 2 months ago. I thought it was his choice. Now, I'm not so sure. Karen, of course, denied everything. When approached at the next HOA meeting, she played the saint. I was just looking out for the other children, she said, smiling. We all want what's best for everyone, don't we? No one wants to say it, but it was clear. She thought my daughter was less than everyone. She had manipulated the system, bent people to her will, and hidden behind politeness and protocol. But now that wall was cracking. I wasn't going to stop. Not until every parent, every teacher, every administrator knew what they allowed to happen. Because silence is complicity, and I had stayed silent long enough. They thought I would move on, that after a few apologies, a few gentle nods, I would let it go. They were wrong. They didn't realize who they were dealing with, because when someone tries to erase your child's dignity, you stop being a bystander. You become a storm. I started small. I revisited every email Ava's school had sent me in the last 3 months. Every vague message, every IEP update, every courtesy notice. I cross-referenced them with Ava's own words, what she remembered, what she had experienced. The inconsistencies screamed from the screen. Then I called other parents, especially those I knew had children in special education. At first, there was hesitation. But once I explained what had happened to Ava, the floodgates opened. One mother said her autistic son had been redirected from group activities several times recently. Another admitted her daughter with ADHD had stopped being invited to field trips due to focus concerns. They didn't realize these were patterns. I did. I asked them for documentation, texts, emails, even photos. A parent forwarded me a screenshot of a PDA WhatsApp chat. Karen had written, some of these kids need more specialized settings. We can't keep prioritizing one at the cost of the many. It was damning. Another sent me a school event planning thread where Karen questioned the appropriateness of including children with mobility devices in certain performances. Not all shows are meant to be inclusive, she had typed, bold as brass. Still, it wasn't enough. I needed someone from inside. I reached out to a janitor. I knew Mr. Allen. He'd always smiled at Ava, always held doors open for her, always gave her a high five when she rolled by. When I called him, there's a long pause. Then he said, I've been waiting for you to ask. What do you mean? I saw it happen, he said. I saw them take her down that hallway. I asked the assistant principal what was going on, and she said, we're following a suggestion Karen made to the principal. Too many complaints about the wheelchair, about the distractions. Complaints from who? I asked, even though I already knew. Karen. All Karen. That was the final crack in the dam. I lawyered up the next day. I met with a civil rights attorney who listened carefully, read every document, and shook her head in disbelief. This isn't just unethical, she said. It's discriminatory. It's a potential violation of federal law. We drafted a formal letter. We named names. We cited laws. We demanded action. And then I recorded a video. I sat in front of my phone, holding back tears but letting the fire show in my voice. I said, to the people who locked my daughter in a room and called it accommodation, you messed with the wrong kid. I won't be quiet. Not for your comfort. Not for your rules. Not for your HOA. Then I hit upload. It was time to make them listen. The video didn't take long to spread. At first, it was just my circle, friends, relatives, a few local parents. But by the next morning, it had been shared over 1,000 times. Comments flooded in. Some were supportive. Some were stunned. But the most heartbreaking ones came from other parents, parents who had stayed silent for too long. My daughter has autism. She was redirected during every assembly this year. They said it was to avoid overstimulation. Now, I know what they meant. My son uses a speech device. Karen once told me his robot voice made it hard for others to concentrate. I thought I was overreacting. Suddenly, I wasn't just telling Ava's story. I was giving voice to dozens of others. Former teachers began messaging me. One apologized for not pushing back hard enough. Another admitted Karen had influence. The principal listened to her more than to the special ed team. I regret staying quiet. It wasn't just words anymore, it was proof. Testimonies, patterns, names. A local reporter from the community newspaper reached out. She said, this can't stay buried. She interviewed me and several parents. We sat on a park bench, the same park where Karen had once scolded Ava, and told everything on camera. The article was published 2 days later. HOA member accused of influencing schools' discriminatory policies toward disabled students. The headline alone was enough to light a match. Karen's name began trending locally. People dug into her background. Photos of her speaking at PTA meetings. Screenshots from community forums where she used coded language like protecting classroom integrity and minimizing disruption. Even old posts resurfaced. Ones where she questioned the appropriateness of inclusion programs. The backlash was instant. The school board, previously silent, issued a statement that they were launching an internal investigation into how IEP accommodations were handled and whether any outside influence had impacted policy decisions. But the most satisfying moment came at the next HOA board meeting. Karen walked in, clutching her files and signature clipboard, only to find a row of residents waiting, arms crossed, phones out, and faces set in stone. One by one, homeowners stood and spoke. You don't represent this neighborhood. We trusted you. You used that trust to target children. You are the reason I'm ashamed to say I live here. A vote was called. Karen was removed from her position on the HOA board. Another member resigned quietly the next day. The school's vice principal placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. My inbox was overflowing with messages from advocacy groups, legal professionals, and parents from all over the country. This was no longer a local matter. It was a mirror held up to the face of a system that had failed children like Ava for years. Only now it couldn't look away. The truth was out, and there was no locking it away. Justice didn't come overnight, but when it did, it came with clarity, with dignity, and with the undeniable truth on our side. The district, under increasing pressure and public scrutiny, officially released a statement acknowledging that Ava's IEP had been violated. They didn't try to minimize it this time. They didn't say miscommunication or unfortunate circumstance. They called it what it was, a failure of protection, a breach of trust, and an act of discrimination. The principal was placed under formal review, and the vice principal who coordinated Ava's removal quietly stepped down. But the moment that truly mattered, the moment we'd fought so hard for, came when Ava was granted a full opportunity to retake her exam under proper supervision with the same accommodations every other student had received. She walked into that testing room with her head held high, her favorite lucky pencil in hand, and this time, she wasn't afraid of being forgotten. She finished her exam in full. She came out smiling. "I did it," she whispered, and I could see something in her eyes, a spark that hadn't been there since before that terrible day. As for Karen, the school board, after reviewing multiple testimonies and internal communications, removed her from the PDA and banned her from all future school committee involvement. The HOA followed suit after a unanimous vote by homeowners. Karen was removed from her seat on the board, her influence gone as quickly as it had spread. At the next public school meeting, I stood up and spoke, not with rage, but with calm, commanding truth. What happened to my daughter should never happen to anyone's child. But what's worse is how many people looked away while it happened. You are not here to manage reputations. You are here to protect students. Never forget that again. The room was silent. Even the ones who had once avoided eye contact were now listening. I left that meeting knowing we had done more than win a battle. We had broken the silence. Ava was no longer invisible, and neither was the harm that had been done to her. To every parent watching this right now, please hear me. When someone mistreats your child, when they try to silence them, isolate them, or make them feel like they don't belong, don't you dare stay silent. You are your child's first line of defense. You are their voice when the system decides it doesn't want to hear them. I know it's scary. I know how exhausting it feels to be the only one speaking up, especially when the ones with power try to make you feel small. But this story isn't just about Ava. This is about your child, your neighbor's child, the one who stutters, the one who wheels into class, the one who wears noise-canceling headphones, the one who's different. And that difference is their strength. Never let someone's discomfort dictate your child's worth. And if someone tries to put them behind a closed door, metaphorically or literally, kick that door down. Expose them. Hold them accountable. Because when one of us fights back, all of us rise. If this story moved you, share it. Comment below if something like this has ever happened in your school or neighborhood. And please subscribe, because this isn't the last story of injustice we'll tell. And together, we're going to make damn sure that silence never wins again. If you believe that no child should be locked away because they're different, share this video. If you've ever been silenced by a system that protects power instead of people, comment below and tell your story. And if you're ready to stand with every parent fighting for their child's dignity, subscribe now. Because this is more than a story, it's a movement. And silence only wins when we let it.